Welcome back to the Josh Calloway podcast. It's been a while since we've been with you, but we have an interesting topic tonight that we're going to deal with, and I'm super excited about it. I have Mr. Aaron Wells back with us again tonight. How you been, Aaron?
Doing good.
Awesome. I know you've been busy.
Yeah,
had a lot going on over the summer.
Oh, yeah. We had the local GOP chapter. I don't know if elected is the right term, but I guess that's the right term. Voted me in as the chairman. So
that's right, of Breckenridge County.
Yes, that's correct.
That's good. We have a special guest with us tonight, my wife, Angela Calloway.
Good evening.
Good evening. I'm glad to have you with us. Aaron and I have done this several times by ourselves, and I know people get tired of looking at our ugly faces. And so it's nice to have a beautiful face that the camera can go to and hear your beautiful voice. And so I say that because I don't want to get in trouble when I get home. So
don't let the looks deceive you. We've brought the firepower tonight.
That's exactly right. So we're going to talk about the subject of school choice. I've had a lot of people that have reached out to me, had a lot of questions about it. And the amendment, which is Amendment 2, not to be confused with the Second Amendment, because this has nothing to do with gun rights at all. And there are people that have thought that it does. It is the Second Amendment that will be on our ballot for the election, election day being November the 5th, but early election starting. And so this is on the ballot. There is another amendment on there, Amendment 1, that primarily just says that non-citizens cannot vote in Kentucky elections. I believe it's a no-brainer. There are people saying that it's not necessary, but there have been some states that have done some shady things. We want to make sure that Kentucky is covered in that. And so I'm encouraging people, of course, to vote yes for that. The Second Amendment, or Amendment 2, that is on the ballot deals with educational freedom or school choice. And I want to go ahead and say that I do support educational freedom. I support school choice, a lot of different options that I support in that. And I'll explain why as we go through this. And so I want to look at this objectively, and I want people to go vote what they believe is best. That's why this is on the ballot, is so that the people can weigh in. Here's how we got here. In 2021, we passed an educational savings account bill, and the Kentucky Supreme Court weighed in on that bill and basically said, I believe a wrong ruling, but they ruled that we could not have a school choice or educational freedom program in the state of Kentucky without changing the Constitution. That was basically where they left us. The ruling kind of said that your tax dollars belong to them before they actually get them. So it was strange in the way they ruled, but they left us in this position to where the only option we had to move forward was to change the Constitution. And I think it's a neat option for us, for the fact that people get to weigh in on it. Not that they don't get to weigh in on it through their representative, but you will actually get to go to the ballot and decide, do you want to authorize us, the legislature, to be able to look at options for school choice in the state of Kentucky? So I kind of wanted to set that up, and there are a lot of different thought processes about this. But if you look at Kentucky on a map, what you will see is that every state that touches Kentucky has some form of school choice in it. So some of the reasoning behind doing this is so that we can compete with the states that are around us. If you look at what's going on in Tennessee and how they are growing and booming. And so we've worked on our tax rate. We've worked on a lot of different things, but it's important for education to be able to attract people to the state of Kentucky, to give parents option and choice. And so we want to go through some of the questions that we've been asked and try to cover some of those together. And if you have questions, and I know Angie has had people reach out to her because I'm a legislator, what does your husband think about this, and asking those questions. So we want to make it as clear as we can and let people have the information, and then we will follow back up with this. If there are more questions, if people need to reach out to us, we'll give you that information at the end to be able to help with any questions that people have.
Yeah, we had a big discussion about this at our GOP meeting on Thursday night as well, and it took some time to walk through all of the information about school choice, not because the amendment is vague, because the language isn't really that vague in the amendment. It says here to give parents choices in educational opportunities for their children. Are you in favor of enabling the General Assembly to provide financial support for the education costs of students in kindergarten through 12th grade who are outside the system of common, in parentheses, public schools by amending the Constitution of Kentucky as stated below? And then it goes into the General Assembly may provide financial support for the education of students outside the system of common schools. The General Assembly may exercise this authority by law, sections, and it gives several sections of this Constitution notwithstanding, and those are some provisions and exceptions and whatnot. But I was really surprised at how, at a GOP local county meeting, the first Thursday of every month at 5:00 in the Breckenridge County Fiscal Courtroom, then I was really surprised.
No advertisement detected.
None at all. I was really surprised by how many people had never actually even heard the text read or hadn't read the text themselves. They were all coming with, they knew that Republicans were supporting the amendment, but they had seen a lot of advertisement against the amendment. And it was like, oh, how can you say no to the little girl on TV saying, please vote no, or I won't have a school, or whatever the thing says. And so it's obvious that the campaign against it has been very effective as far as at least getting the attention of people. I'm not saying it's persuaded voters. But I think one of the points you were making earlier about all the states around us having school choice, some of them are purple, some of them are Democrat, some of them are Republican. Nearly every state in the United States has some sort of school choice provisions. It's not really a Republican or Democrat issue. It's a parents issue, is really what it is. And, we have a federalist system, so we get to see what all of those states do. And this provision that's being put forward is not just something that's come up out of the blue. Right. A lot of the advertisements that are against it that we've dealt with is almost acted like, we've made this up out of thin air. The legislature just all of a sudden wants to torpedo public schools. But that's not the case at all. This is being done in a lot of places in the country. Right. And their scores are a whole lot better than Kentucky's. Yeah. And our legislature looks, and our parents and our teachers even look at Kentucky and say, what can we do better? And whenever the governor, who the Department of Education is under, refuses to budge in any way or bring parents into the equation, then this is what happens. The parents are given an option through the legislature. Right. And so that's something that people didn't really understand, that I've talked to a lot. They didn't really understand what school choice was about because they hadn't read the amendment. Yeah. And then at the same time, then they hadn't, they had no clue that people around us do school choice at all. That's one thing that I noticed right off the bat. So for sure.
There have been some people reach out to you, Angie, and have asked questions. What are some of those questions that you got from moms that have reached out to you?
So some of the questions, and I think the opposition is giving information that is promotes fear because they say things like the teachers are going to lose their jobs, and no one wants a teacher to lose their job. We're all for teachers. So what would you say to them if they say, if I vote for Amendment 2, then some teachers in Kentucky are going to lose their jobs?
Well, there's a couple things about that. One is that on both sides of the advertising for this amendment, there is misinformation that is going out. There's no question about that. But there's some of it is just based on studies when they look at what other states have done. they're basing from the people that support this, they'll make statements like teachers will get more pay if Amendment 2 passes. That is not what Amendment 2 does. On the other hand, you have people that state, well, teachers will lose their job if Amendment 2 passes. That's not what it does either. But when you look at studies, there have been states where teachers have increased their pay based on the fact that competition came to their state. On the other hand, there's no way we lose teachers except for two things to happen. The first thing that has to happen is for kids to move out of the state of Kentucky. A great number of kids to move out. If that happens, we're not going to need as many teachers. Or if Amendment 2 passes and a great percentage of parents decide that they're going to homeschool. Well, we've raised 5 children together. We had our kids in a private Christian school. How many parents do you think are going to decide to bring their kids home and homeschool them?
Probably not a lot.
Probably not a lot, but it gives parents options. But we still have to have teachers. And this is what I've said, and I think it's important for us to look at it this way. The 3 priorities in education: students, parents, teachers. Everything else above that is a support structure that enables a child to get an education. But I think that down through the last several decades, that we have lost focus on those 3 priorities. And so what I would say is that as long as there's kids in Kentucky, teachers are going to be needed in Kentucky. We're not going to lose teachers. Does that mean that a teacher might not leave the certain education system that they're in and go to another education system that opens up and teaches there? Great possibility. But teachers are going to be where the kids are.
Right. Yeah.
Well, another question that was posed to me was, would we currently lose funding for the public schools? That is what the opposition is stating in the mailers and the advertisements, is if you vote for Amendment 2, then you're going to have the public schools lose funding.
So this is the thing about Amendment 2, is that it really doesn't do anything policy-wise.
Right.
And that is where all the fear has been ginned up and generated from, because they get to suppose what is going to happen if Amendment 2 passes. But there's this little word that is inside of the amendment that is key for everybody to understand. Again, I support many options for kids to get the best education they can possibly get. But there's this little word, may, that is in there. And Aaron, you can probably speak a little bit to this, but whenever a law says may, guess what happens after that?
A lot of fighting.
A lot of policy fighting.
Yeah.
That's exactly what happens.
Yeah, and there's 2 points. One, in order for, even in the worst case scenario that has ever been passed, in order for public schools to lose funding, then they have to lose a large number of students, because their funding is based on how many students attend their schools.
So let me insert here. Yes. If we have a school choice program in Kentucky,
right?
Okay, the majority still, 90%,
yes,
would probably still attend public schools.
That's correct.
And in the states that have the most robust school choice systems, it's about 90%.
Yes.
So if Kentucky grows into this, you're looking at, who knows where this goes. And so,
but the point is, as well, is to hold the public schools accountable so that they do better, because we want our public schools to educate children correctly. We don't want them to educate them wrong, like they're doing now. And so the school choice, even the most, what the teachers unions hate the most, the school choice policies that they hate the most, then even at that, they're not going to shut the public schools down. That's not the point. The point isn't to have, a mass exodus of 70%, which is some of the numbers that the opposition
Right.
pointed out, like only 25% of teachers are going to be left or whatever. Absolutely. Again, this has been tried in states all across the United States. Nothing that has been proposed is draconian compared to any of those.
And again, red, blue, and purple states,
Yes, all of them,
have all done this.
Yeah.
And so I think that, and I'm not going to dive into the numbers as we go through this, because for a couple reasons. We may do this at some point. We may look at some of the outcomes that are happening currently in Kentucky.
Yeah.
But this is not an attack
Right.
on anybody or anything per se. This is a support. We are trying to build a support system for parents in Kentucky. I live in Breckinridge County. We have a good school system here in Breckinridge County, a good public school system. We have other school options here in the county. And so to think that because some type of funding came up that there's going to be a mass exodus, no parent is going to pull their child out of a school system that is performing, that is doing well.
Why would you take your child out of something that's doing well? The problem is that in a lot of places they aren't doing well.
And that's what I think it's important to understand is, are we going to focus on every kid in Kentucky or not?
Right.
And I think that's what we have to ask ourselves. I stood in the rotunda of the Capitol and had some school groups come in that I was able to meet with, and met some children there that were being educated in the west end of Louisville. One young lady I got to talk to had made it to the 10th grade and could not read. She could not read. And because of a mission project, she was able to move into an education system that began to focus on her, and she was flourishing. She was so excited about what she was learning, about the abilities that she had gained as a result of that. Yeah. And so I think that's where we're at as a state. We've got to ask ourselves this question: are we going to focus on every child or not? Yeah. And give them the best option and opportunity they can possibly have.
So you mentioned that in other states, it's not a party issue. But
it's still a partisan issue sometimes.
But for the most part, you have it. But in Kentucky, it seems like
it's what can the government control? So California has a lot of school choice options, but the government still has the ability to tell them you can or you cannot teach this. And that's really what it's going to come down to at the end of the day, as to why the teachers unions, and especially the governor and Jackie Coleman, don't want school choice in Kentucky, because this is their program to turn Kentucky into Democrats. That's why it's such a battle here with the Democrats.
That's a perfect segue into this question. And Angie and I have talked about this extensively, but about the homeschooling situation.
So a lot of homeschool parents are not for the school choice because they don't want the government to interfere or have anything to do with what they're teaching. My question was, is there currently anything now that is keeping the government from interfering with homeschooling?
Yes.
And I think that maybe we have not done a good job by notifying the public of policy that has been filed that would inhibit homeschooling or get in the government in the middle of it, because that already exists. Right. Just this past session, we had a bill that was filed that tried to put regulations specifically on homeschools. There's two sides to that argument, because when you speak to certain people in the education system, they see the worst of the worst. Mm-hmm. So they see the kid that's getting ready to get kicked out of public school. The parent says, well, I'm going to homeschool them. So they pull them out, and they maybe don't do a good job or don't follow up. They're using it for that situation. But the risk currently exists for the government to engage or to try to put restriction and regulation on homeschool. So the answer to keeping the government out of your homeschool is not blocking Amendment 2.
Right.
The answer is to make sure that you have the right legislators sitting in those seats that are representing you.
Yes.
Right.
Because and I understand what people say about the accountability. Where's the accountability going to come? We have accountability. We have what's called truancy laws that hold parents accountable.
Right.
But if they're asking about the state accountability that puts us 38th in the nation, that puts us at 40% reading proficiency and 37% math proficiency, that's not the accountability that I'm looking for. When parents can get up from the school they are in and say, this is not working for my child, and they can take their child where they need to be educated and they can afford to do so, that will produce an accountability that the government cannot produce.
And is not interested in producing, apparently. Apparently, they're not interested. Now, if you want to talk about the homeschool issue, then the homeschool groups and all of that have been under assault for decades in Kentucky. But a massive battle was fought in the late 80s, early 90s, somewhere in there in Kentucky, and won for homeschoolers in Kentucky. And it's been very difficult to pass any legislation since then.
Yes.
But it's still tried nearly every session.
Yes.
They try something against the homeschoolers. The same legislators that are defending the homeschoolers session after session, reading through the bills, making sure nothing, and a lot of times it gets no fanfare because the Democrats are trying to slide it in, you know, without anybody knowing about it. And then whenever they shoot
We even
it
had
down,
a Republican try to do it.
yeah.
And
Exactly,
and we immediately got on it and made sure
There's people
that
and
it
watchdogs
wasn't
that
going
are out
anywhere.
there looking for this, and it gets shot down. Those same legislators are the ones that are supporting Amendment 2 and that are going to be passing school choice legislation. They're not interested in backstabbing the homeschoolers at all. I was homeschooled myself. You know, I would be very, our daughter is starting a little bit early, but she's starting, you know, kind of half days. We have a homeschool curriculum and getting her going in kindergarten and all of that stuff. It's very important to me as far as that goes. The people that support homeschooling also support school choice for a reason. It's about giving people options to educate their children in the best way possible.
And well, I was just going to say, and we have to make sure when we get into the policy, when the legislature gets into the policy, that we give options for opt-out. That way, if whatever the policy is, that there's nothing that is pushed upon
Right.
a parent. Now, if we passed in 2022 House Bill 9, that was the charter school bill, and that bill also was struck down by the Supreme Court. But there was $5 million, if I recall, that was put in the budget specifically for charter schools. This is the way that charter schools are set up currently under the law in Kentucky. It is controlled by the local school board. And the local school board decides, do we want a charter school or do we not? And then it decides, do we want to privatize it or do we want it to be ran publicly by the current school board? So they get to make that option.
And that was still shut down.
And that was still shut down. So I think as we craft policy, we will continue to protect homeschoolers. We will continue to protect private schools. And ultimately, this is not about the government and schools.
Right.
This is about parents and kids. It's about parents and students. And so that's where we have to focus. And if we focus on students, we will not miss the mark.
Yeah.
As long as that is our focus. I think the reason we have missed the mark is because there has been focus in so many other areas.
Right.
And you know, when you look at certain school systems and you got superintendents that are making upwards over $400,000 a year, and you have teachers in districts that are starting out at, you know, $40,000 a year in some school districts, we have focused in the wrong area. That doesn't mean we don't need superintendents. It doesn't mean we don't need administration. We don't need management.
Meaning to clarify there, the teacher salary is low and the administrator salary is high.
Correct.
Basically, yeah.
Correct.
Just so people don't think that you're saying 40,000 is too high, because people misinterpret as they can.
Yeah. In every system, it is like that. It's imbalanced. And if you look at the way that administrative cost has grown over the last decade nationally and statewide, it is unreal. When you look at how funding has went, you look at how teacher pay has went, and then look at administrative cost. And I've heard a lot of people say this. I haven't dove into every school system's budget. I'm not going to dive into their budget specifically.
Right.
But most people will tell you that it is not a funding issue. It's been more of an allocation issue. When we have some systems that can't even get kids home before 7 or 7:30.
Yeah.
And again, I'm not doing this podcast to beat up on schools. I could point out scores and give you all kinds of reasons why that certain areas need this. But I think that the key, again, is that we come back and ask, are we going to focus on every kid in Kentucky or not?
Yeah.
Are we okay with some kids falling through the cracks?
And talking about budgets, has the legislative body not increased the funding for public education for the last 3 budget sessions?
We have the last 2 budget sessions.
Okay.
We have increased funding. We have increased the SEEK funding, which is the amount per child based on how many kids are sitting in a seat. And we have also increased other types of funding, for instance, the transportation funding. Some school districts picked that up themselves because they had more local funding that was coming in. So we decided by next year in this current budget that we would be at 100% funding for all of transportation.
Republican supermajority, right?
Correct.
Okay, just making sure.
So we have increased funding. And I have fought for school choice probably as hard as anybody in the legislature as far as supported it, okay? Mm-hmm. I am for every kid. I am for whatever it takes to make sure that every kid gets the adequate funding to get a proper education.
Right.
So there's no way that I'm going to vote to limit funds that are needed, that are taxpayer dollars, by the way. They're not the government's dollars. They're the taxpayers' dollars. If that were the case, I sent my kids, I have 5 children. Every one of them went to private school. Mm-hmm. And I paid school taxes.
Yep.
And those tax dollars that I paid for school taxes went to schools and educated other people's kids. Mm-hmm. I'm committed to kids getting educated. Yep. And I think most legislators are. I mm-hmm. think that they are. And so a lot of times the pushback that we get is not about that money that takes care of kids, right, that funds students.
Right.
It's about the money that funds the system.
Yes.
Right. Well, speaking of one of the arguments, I actually got a mailer that talked about that the public school system is not fully funded, and so therefore you can't expect results if you don't have the money. But you're saying you have increased funding, so has that helped the scores any?
It's
more
really
money?
Convenient when the people that keep missing the field goal keep moving the goalposts.
Well,
real convenient.
This is what I will say. I have had many people tell me that public education was not adequately funded. And I have asked for a number of multiple people multiple times. And usually the answer that I get is more. There has not been a dollar figure that has been given to me by very many people at all. The local superintendent sent me some numbers that we have looked at, and we got some funding that enabled us to be able to do a remodel project on the middle school. There are things that we have done that I've supported, but when it comes to that, they're not adequately funded. Nobody has been able to put a dollar figure on what adequate funding is. And so I think, it comes down to allocation. Are we adequately allocating? Now, I won't dive in. It's very complicated. The SEEK funding, which is the per pupil funding, is very complicated. And I support looking at it. We need to look at it. We need to put a task force on it and really dive into how we are funding. We have a severe problem in the state of Kentucky with absenteeism in our school systems, a severe problem. And so that is impacting some of the funding for these schools because kids are not showing up that are on the books and, are enrolled. And so we do need to look at that SEEK funding, but we need to back up and start looking at every kid.
Right.
What does it take to get a kid the best education they can possibly get, regardless of what zip code they live in?
There's two things here that I think can tie into some of the questions that I think all of us have been getting about what, Amendment 2, basically the way the opposition is selling it is just going to take a blowtorch to the public school system. That's kind of how it's been sold, just a massacre is what they've been kind of showing, what they've been kind of saying there. The first thing that I would point out is that a few years ago, then our local school system, for instance, tried to get Cloverport system shut down, the Frederick Freitas High School, so that they could get the students over to Breckinridge County and qualify for more funding. So this has been going on. That's just one local example here in our county. That's been going on all across the state for years. So there have been people involved that know how the system works for them to get money, right? And they've been gunning for more money as much as they possibly can. And you could probably do all kinds of research in the state of Kentucky to see how. So the school system knows how the funding works and knows what gives them more money. So it's important to realize that they're not just targeting certain people so that they can, so that they can be a bigger school or so that they can have a little bit more prestige. So the school system depends, the system, I'm not talking about the teachers, but the system depends on that money. So what would have happened, for instance, in that scenario, if Frederick Freitas was shut down, what would have happened to those teachers? Would they have had jobs at Breckinridge County? And I'm not saying that Breckinridge County was doing anything wrong. It was an option. It didn't happen. But think about that all across the state of Kentucky.
Well,
did those teachers move over when they shut down those schools all across the state, or what happened?
Well, this is the thing. 2 points. I want to make this point really quick while I'm thinking about it. So the Cloverport School has a large virtual program. A lot of people may or may not know that, but they have a large virtual program which helps partly with their funding because they're small.
Yeah.
But the other thing that they depend on that they shouldn't have to depend on is they depend on lobbyists to spend every day in Frankfort that we are in session and fight for some type of funding based on what they want, what they need, if they're trying to build a new school, all of these things. It's constantly, we are constantly bombarded with lobbyists that are paid to do this. We have the unions that are there, the school unions that adamantly fight this and probably are putting most of the propaganda out that is being put out to get people to turn against this amendment. And they are specifically targeting homeschoolers because they do not want this to pass. And I want you to think about that. The people that have been behind this bloating of the school system, which are school unions, are the people that are fighting to get this amendment killed. So they are not on your side, homeschooler.
No.
They are not on your side, private schooler. They are not on your side, parent that is looking to get their child the best education they can possibly get.
Yeah.
So you're right in what you're saying is that they know how the funding works, but they also get a lot of their funding through lobbying and people that are paid to go up and lobby legislators to adequately, quote unquote, fund them.
Even if, for instance, if every dollar that was like SEEK funding that followed the student, let's just say that, if every dollar that funded the student went to teachers, they would have a great salary.
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
And if they had to lobby for administrative costs and for school buildings and all of that, that would be okay. You know, because then by, a case-by-case basis, then the legislature or whoever could look at it and approve a school here or approve a school there. Some states, I'm sure, do that, but they want you to give them money on taxes, to give them money through the legislature, to give them money through SEEK, and they just throw it all into a ball, and you can't say what happens to it. That's how they want it to happen. It's almost like you give us our money, we'll hold you hostage for it, and it's the teachers' unions and the school system. And then it goes where we want it to go, and you don't have a say. That's backed up by the governor because that's whose authority it's under.
Yeah.
But that's...
Were you going to ask something?
I was just going to ask, who actually determines the salaries of the teachers?
So that is determined at the local level, and that is one reason that we as a legislature have not given earmarked raises to teachers. We have increased the funding and let the local level decide whether or not that the teachers were going to get raises and how much those raises were, because some systems had additional money from local taxes, so they had already increased teachers' pay. And so some school systems did great with it, some not so great. Some of them did not adequately give the teachers the raises that they should have gotten. And, we had them reach out to us about that. And the teachers, we had teachers that reached out to us and said, y'all gave this money, but if you do not specifically earmark it, we're not getting that.
Can you earmark it?
There's a possibility that we could. I actually supported a bill that provided a stipend this go around for teachers, but we shouldn't have to do that.
Whose side is the teachers union on in that scenario where you've given the funding, but it's not been given to the where do the teachers unions fall there? I
don't know. And I want to ask this, I want to kind of play devil's advocate here in just a minute about school choice. But this is one thing I think it's important to understand is that a lot of people in school systems have complaints about things that are going on inside of their system. Not saying that it's ours at Breckenridge County, I'm just saying across the state. But there are very few people that are willing to go put their name on a ballot for a school board position and go campaign and go make the difference that they think needs to be made. Yeah. And so that was basically, what we were doing. We were putting the money inside of the district at the local level, which is the best way for it to be, and then let those teachers receive from the school board and the administrative staff what, the competitive wage that they could give them. And if that's not working for you, go run for your school board. Yeah. Go get engaged and get involved and make a difference. With that being said, you were talking about who supports what. So who are the people that are against school choice? Think about that. And what do you hear? I'm a news junkie, so I'm always reading news and listening to news clips and things of that nature. So who have been the opposition for school choice primarily in the state of Kentucky, but as a whole? Because It's been discussed about doing this at a federal level, and then there's been discussions about ending the federal Department of Education. So who have you heard from that is actually against this?
We'll start Miss Angie, I guess.
Against school choice?
Yeah.
A lot of superintendents,
That's right.
principals,
Yep, I think that's right.
is what I've heard.
KEA, and of course Andy Bashir and Jackie Coleman.
Yes.
That's what I've heard mostly. Teachers unions, and then the governor and the lieutenant governor just did a big campaign for it.
And I've asked a few teachers, and some are just
afraid.
They just don't know what to say because they don't know what it's going to do to them.
I think that's a really good point, and I was meant to make that earlier, and I forgot. And we went through this at the meeting the other night about this amendment sets the stage for the fight that's going to come after that.
Right.
So every election, first of all, there's going to be a big policy fight if this passes in November. There's going to be a massive policy fight next legislative session. And all of those lobbyists that he's talking about that are lobbying and that are on television and funding and doing all of these things, they're going to be in their ears and in his colleagues' ears for the entire legislative session, trying to get them to not pass anything, first of all. Second of all, any bill that is passed, they're going to try to mark it up to do all that they can to it to, cut out homeschoolers, cut out private schools, all of these things. They're going to try to say separation of church and state. Anything that's related to religion is not getting any funding. And then every election in 2026, which he will be, as far as I know, running again, every primary all across the state is every Republican legislator is probably going to have a challenger funded by the KEA and by school choice people from all over the United States saying, I oppose school choice. And it's going to be a massive fight in the primary, massive fight in the general election. They're trying to cut it off at the pass.
Right. And we've already seen that happen. In my primary election, one of the teachers unions got involved and gave money to my opponent just because of the stance that I've taken on school choice. And there were several candidates that they spent hundreds of thousands of dollars against. Mm-hmm. And now it's happening in the general. Yes. So what you will see anybody that has supported school choice have union money spent against them, union PAC money spent against them to try to get them beat. And they're greatly targeting the Jefferson County area and the Fayette County and some of those purplish districts, because if they win there, they kill a school choice supporter. Yes. Not literally. No. And they take out a school choice supporter, and then they also flip a seat. And so they're going to play this. You're going to hear more and more about it in this election, especially in those heavily populated areas. They're going to do their best to try to take those people out.
And the other thing that I would say is the people that you've talked to, you've also talked to people, and I've talked to people even before this was on the ballot, that are extremely dissatisfied with the school system and with how their kids are being taught. I talked to a man who said he pulled his daughters out of the school system in LaRue County because the teacher or somebody was telling them they could be a cat if they wanted to be. I've talked to two teachers that used to teach in Grayson County, and I won't, give their names or anything like that, but they had a situation at their school where the administration completely failed them to the point where they had to quit their jobs. They didn't feel safe at their jobs anymore. Another lady in LaRue County, we did her floor, and her husband worked in administration, and she was a teacher, and she said, I could not control. I got in trouble for even trying to make a child sit in their seat. She said, I couldn't take it. And she taught 5- and 6-year-olds, kindergartens, first and second grades. These policies and this school choice amendment is not dreamed up by Republican overlords desiring to torpedo what's educating your children. There is massive problems with the education system in Kentucky, and it's everywhere. And them trying to silence everybody with false information and with lies and saying, well, I don't support school choice because it's going to take away teacher salaries, just blatantly lying, is actively trying to shut down the concerns of people whose children are not being educated well. Obviously, the numbers bear that out. There is obviously a problem. So for all of the, and there are people that are, you have sympathy for people who are misinformed about it, is what we would say.
Yeah.
They've seen an advertisement, but this is an extremely serious subject whenever we're talking about the future of our state. And people need to actively pursue the information to find out what is going on. That's the only way. The media is against us. Everybody's against it. You're going to have to pursue it if you're going to find out.
And no matter what you technically feel about school choice, one way or the other, the bottom line is, what are we, 38th? We're Kentucky?
You'll read everything from 38th to 44th.
So that's...
I'm sorry, 32nd to 44th.
So that's... what we're doing is not working.
Right.
Not casting blame at anyone, but that's a problem. Right. Because these kids are graduating and they're going to be our leaders and our workers and different things. And if they can't read at a proficient level, we're all in trouble, not just them.
At what point are we just producing the next welfare recipients, as opposed to people who can actually work jobs?
And how are they graduating? I read a statistic that they're graduating like 88% of some high school students, that their reading proficiency is 40%.
Yeah, there's all types of examples and illustrations like that. And this is what I think is key to understand, is that no specific school system is right for every single kid.
Right.
And that's not an attack to say that. If it's not working for you, if it doesn't fit your life, if it doesn't fit your values, whatever the case may be, no specific system. It's not a cookie cutter. Every kid is not the exact same. And, I think about another representative, and I've heard her talk about this issue, and she talked about how that she had to go out of state because her child had some disabilities that didn't have a specialty option for them here in the state of Kentucky. And they went out of state to Pennsylvania, I believe it was, and got their child educated. They got educated themselves to help educate their child, and then brought them back to Kentucky and began to work with their child. And she said that it was because of that specialty education and the fact that they had the means to afford it that their son has been as successful as he's been. So there's a couple of the arguments. I wanted to throw those out there. This is what some people say. They say that school choice is just a way so that wealthy people can get their kids' education paid for. And then they also talk about the fact that private schools don't have to accept every child, so they get to discriminate against kids. And so two things I wanted to say to that. One is people that are wealthy are already getting the type of education they want their child to get. Yeah. There are people in Breckenridge County that are wealthy that want their kids to be valedictorian in their public school. They could have them somewhere else, but they have them where they want them based on not means. They have the means to put them where they want them. Most people that are wealthy are doing that currently. Yeah. So that is not at all the case. What happens is the people that don't have the means get the opportunity to get options for their kids. Yeah. Their zip code does not decide where their kid goes to school. And imagine if we had some type of funding for children that had special needs and schools opened up that just solely specialized in those particular areas for those kids. It would be amazing. Guess what? We already have that to some degree. The School of the Blind. Yeah. The School of the Deaf here in Kentucky, that is funded with public dollars. Yeah. So in every area of society, every sector of society, we always say that competition produces excellence. except for K through 12.
Yeah.
So we have public dollars that go to private entities in post-secondary education.
Yeah.
Not just private entities, religious private entities.
Yes.
Currently.
Right.
So we already do that in every area. Pre-K, most places that do pre-K, it's privatized, and public dollars help do that. We have some programs here in Kentucky to help subsidize that. Mm-hmm. So we're already doing that in every area except this one area alone. Mm-hmm. And primarily it is the unions that say there's no reason, it's not right for public dollars to go to private entities. Mm-hmm. But we do it in every other sector of society.
I really do think, and I don't know for sure, as far as I couldn't, there's not like a secret video recording of all the Democrats and teachers unions talking about why they don't want Amendment 2. But for instance, there's a church that I know of, a pretty big church, and they have just opened a daycare / preschool. And they had to spend a certain amount of money in order to get a grant from the state and then from the Southern Baptist Convention to open their preschool and their daycare system. I mean, that's taxpayer dollars going to help operate a pre-K / daycare that's literally inside of the church building. It's on church property. And nobody seems to have a problem with that. They do have a problem when it comes down to what they are taught and curriculum. And I really think ideologically, because the response that you're getting here, the opposition that you're getting, is not from people that are just practical public school people, right? The practical public school people, the teachers and people that just want children to have a good education, don't have any problem with school choice. It's the people who are ideologically driven that are the main opposition. And they want to control what your children learn and what they don't learn.
And it will be amazing.
And there's nothing stopping them.
It will be amazing to see when this is all over, after November the 5th, how much outside money from teachers' unions will be spent in the state of Kentucky combating the amendment and combating legislators that have supported it.
Yeah.
So it will be telling. We will be able to see. But you're exactly right. I think at the local level and at the ground level, which, we call it the ground level, I think it's the pinnacle.
Yeah.
I think teachers and parents are the pinnacle of education. But at that level, the only feedback that I'm getting through teachers has primarily been questions about the information that has been given them through the unions.
Yes.
So it's been through them. And there have been some superintendents that came out in the news. And I think the Democrats' Twitter page or Twitter account put out something. I can't remember the exact article, but I know there were superintendents there that were speaking out against the amendment. There's been a lot of discussion because of using public dollars to combat the amendment, and the Attorney General weighed in on that and, spoke about that.
They actually had an event in July on school property in one of the, it was Jefferson or maybe right beside, I can't remember which county it was. I saw it today. But on school property, they had an anti-Amendment 2 gathering.
Well, this is basically
protect our schools.
Basically, what the Attorney General office stated is, one, you cannot use public dollars, so that would include email accounts, social media sites that are handled through third party that they're paying contracts for to manage, things of that nature, emails, any of that could not be used. They did say that in an open forum that was not a required setting, so if they just had a general meeting, that they could give pros and cons, but they had to be able to do both.
Right.
So you had to have, if somebody was going to speak against it, the floor had to be open for somebody to speak for it. But all of this has happened, and I believe that you were exactly right. When you look at most of the opposition, it comes from way up. Mm-hmm. It's coming from national school unions. It is coming from the KEA, places like that. And I think that the misinformation that they're putting out is for one reason, and that is they do not want to lose control of the education system.
Let me ask you this. This is maybe a little bit conspiracy theorist. I don't know, but I don't really think so. And in the last, I think it's like 58 years, maybe something like that, or maybe 55 years, something. We've had 2 Republican governors. I think that's correct, isn't it? Maybe Ernie Fletcher and Matt Bevin.
I believe that's right.
I think that's right. So Kentucky has had Democrat governors for years. Mm-hmm. Steve Beshear, our current governor's dad, was governor. No one has really gotten national attention from the Democratic Party except for Andy Beshear. Mm-hmm. There's a reason for that. It's because there's a lot of things that have shown up in Kentucky, especially in the education system, that are not just Kentucky generated. They are from the Democratic National Committee. And in a lot of ways, they're using the Kentucky education system as a little bit of a test market for some of their policies. You think about the Senate Bill 150 that y'all fought against last year. The organization behind the opposition to that, where they were using public school buses to bring kids up to protest. Mm-hmm. The people that were there protesting, they weren't all Kentucky people. They were national protesters, professional protesters. There's professional funding for these type of, protests through the education system. And so I think, again, you're fighting, whenever you're talking about all that money and that stuff being way higher up, it's because you're having to battle an agenda that goes beyond Frankfurt. It really does. Mm-hmm. The messaging and everything, all of the confusion that's being sowed, it seems really familiar because it's all across the nation. It is a focused attempt to, very powerful people are interested in this bill not passing, is basically what I'm trying to say.
Well, this is what happened in 2020 when COVID hit and schools were shut down, kids came home. Parents began to really be enlightened to what was going on in their child's education all across the country. And it was a travesty what happened. The fact that kids were kept out of the classroom for so long, we'll never recover that. That generation, many of those kids will struggle their whole life because of what took place, because some of the unions, the national unions, fought to keep schools shut down. They can't deny that. That is an absolute fact. They have the receipts to prove it. But it did open a lot of people's eyes. And I think that when that began to happen, that a lot of parents really began to start getting engaged in their child's education. Yeah. And that's really what this, hopefully, if this passes, that's what I hope that it really drives in the state, is for parents, once again, to get engaged in their child's education, know what they're being taught, care about what they are being taught, to make sure that they are learning, to make sure that they are surrounded by the values that you want instilled in your child. Yeah. And we've got into so many other things, and I said that, I'm not going to use this podcast to specifically deal with that, but we have got into so many other things in the education system, and we have, again, some great school systems here in the state of Kentucky, but so many other things that have taken the focus away from reading, writing, and arithmetic. Let kids learn the basic. Teach them that. That's all that we need the system for. Now, are there kids that are in bad homes that need help? Sure. Are there kids that don't have support systems at home? Absolutely. Are there kids that get the most of their food from while they're at school? Absolutely. All of these things are societal issues that we have to deal with, but we can't lose focus about in regard to what this is about.
Right.
And that is every child, best education possible. And I really don't think that when you just talk to people in society, I don't think people are against that.
No.
When I make the statement that education primarily is about students, parents, and teachers, I don't know anybody that's arguing with that except for NEA.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And if that's their argument, if they are against this because I support kids and parents and teachers, I'm up for that fight.
Yeah. They were the ones afraid to put it on the ballot. You know, whenever the legislative session was going on, they were the ones fighting against it going to the vote for the people to decide. It wasn't the legislators. It was the ones that are fighting against it now.
Yeah.
So
What other questions? Is there anything else? We'll wrap this up. I just felt it important that we do this. I want to close out with a video and then make sure we didn't have anything else that we wanted to cover. But I talked about how that in other areas of society we actually do this. So this was a video that I had come across and I thought it would be good. It kind of gives that perspective and maybe will open some people's eyes to what we are trying to do and how that it actually works in every other area of society. And some of the problems that we're having are a result of the fact that we do not use the same type of capitalist system in the education system as we use in every other area of society. And this video is by Nick Freitas, who is a delegate in Virginia. He's a great guy. I've got to talk to him once before, and he's done a lot of good things in Virginia, ran for Congress and got beat, but he's a true conservative, good guy. And you can check out his podcast. He has an excellent podcast that he does. And so go check Nick out.
I was sitting in a conversation with the vice mayor of Charlottesville, Virginia. I don't know if you're aware of this. Charlottesville is not exactly a bastion of conservative thought. I'm sure this comes as a shock, right? But I was looking at him and I said, I want to run an idea past you, a concept past you. I said, we both agree that education is critical, right? He goes, absolutely, education is critical. I said, what about food? Is having food critical? He kind of looks at me strange. He goes, well, yeah, of course. I said, okay. I said, well, if food is critical, arguably more critical than education on some level, right? If you're starving to death, you probably aren't learning calculus. I said, let's do this. Let's have the government take over the grocery store industry. And here's what's going to happen. The government is going to set up 100,000 grocery stores all over the country, and then you're going to be assigned one based off of your address. Now, when you show up to that grocery store, you're not actually going to shop for your groceries. No, you're going to go in there, and some sort of government board or governing body is going to determine what your grocery bag looks like based off of the federal food pyramid, right? And that's what they're going to assign. But look, don't worry. If you don't like something in your grocery bag, just get ready to go through a 2, 4 to 6 year process, hiring a lobbyist and going through and determining what sort of new groceries can look like in your bag. And don't get me wrong, you're going to have to fight against everybody else that wants something else. But that's what that process is going to look like for changing what your groceries look like. Oh, by the way, none of the people working at the government grocery store are going to be rewarded based off of creativity, ingenuity, work ethic. No. They'll just be rewarded based off of seniority. Does that sound like an establishment you would like to do business with? And he looks at me and goes, no. I said, that is exactly what we did with public education. You are assigned a government school based off of your address. When you go in there, you have very little say over the classes you take, the curriculum that you get, and if you want to change something, either because you want something because it would be better for your educational outcomes, or you just really don't like something that's being taught, get ready for a massive political battle as you attempt to try to achieve that. Oh, by the way, none of your teachers are rewarded based off of the actual end results that they produce. They're simply rewarded based off of their seniority. But I guarantee you this much. I guarantee you this much. If the government had taken over all the grocery stores, and it had become the utter failure that it inevitably would have been, and somebody would have stood up and said, there's a better way to do this, you know what everybody would have said? You hate government grocery store employees. You don't want poor people to eat. But see, it's absurd when we talk about it like this, because we all know that we have public funds that go to people that need food. It's called WIC. It's called EBT. We all know that we have public funds that go to people that need health care. It's called Medicaid. It's called Medicare. When the government builds a road, it's not a government company that builds it. It's a private contractor. When we build some sort of system for the military, it's not a government agency. It's Northrop Grumman or Boeing. But guaranteed, when you talk about genuine school choice and dollars following students, how you can't spend public dollars on a private service provider? Oh, except for WIC, except for Medicare, except for Medicaid, except for EBT, except for contractors. You can do it all there, but we can't do it in this one area of education. Why? Why is this the one area that so many people within the establishment are willing to fight for tooth and nail against parents having any sort of decision over how their kids are educated or to what ends they're educated? Those are the questions that we need to start asking, and those are the examples we need to start using in order to get people to look at this and hear these arguments that are coming from the regime, right, that you're just anti-teacher, anti-education. You're none of those things.
I think that's a perfect example of what we've been trying to say.
Yeah.
Just the fact that we're not anti-teachers. We're not anti-anything. We are for kids and parents having the best option given to them for their child. That's it.
And if people believe that education is a right, that your child has a right to be educated, you better make sure they get educated. You know, if they can't read and write, that's not education. Right. And if the system isn't working currently for every student, as Representative Calloway said, if every student doesn't have an opportunity, that's not the right to education. It's just the government pretending like you have the right to education.
Yeah.
And I think what people need to understand, voting for the amendment in November, it's not voting for vouchers. It's not voting for the education savings account. Okay. It's not voting against teachers. It is just opening up the conversation for the legislative body to determine if we can have school choice. It's just the opportunity to have conversation around it, correct?
Exactly right.
So you voting yes on the amendment, it's not going to shut your public schools down. It's not going to fire your teachers. It's not going to give money to private religious schools that you disagree with. It's just initiating a conversation.
That's correct.
Which could lead to great things based on other states.
Yes.
Yes, it could lead to great things based on other states, and it could lead to great things in regard to every child. Mm-hmm. And that, I think, has to be the focus. Are kids currently falling through the cracks in our current system? They
are. And we need to do everything that we can do to help them.
Exactly right.
And that's why I'm voting yes in November. Just thought I'd throw that out there.
Well, I will be voting yes in November as well. And I think
for Josh Calloway for state representative.
Yeah, exactly right. I will be on the ballot in November. And there's another guy that will be on the ballot as well. Some people may have heard of him. Trump, I think, is his last name. He'll be on the ballot as well. I thought you were going to
say your opponent. I was like, oh no.
So it's a big year. It's a presidential year. We have these two amendments that are going to be on the ballot. You need to make sure that you realize that voting a straight party does not take care of voting for the amendments. Yeah. So even though the Republican legislature passed the amendments, if you vote straight Republican, that does not check off the amendments for you. You will have to manually check those boxes for the amendments, because I had some people ask me about that. So make sure that you don't forget most importantly, make sure that you vote. Make sure that you go vote. We need every person to show up and to let their voice be heard. And I encourage you, get the information about this amendment. If you want to reach out to me, josh.calloway at kylegislature.gov. You can call my office in Frankfort. They will put you personally in contact with me. You can look that up on the Kentucky LRC website. But reach out to me if you have questions. But don't not vote for this or vote for it specifically just because somebody is telling you through some pamphlet or information. Do the research, ask the questions, and I encourage you to support this because I am for every child in the state of Kentucky, and I do not want another kid to fall through the cracks. I want to give parents every option possible so that their child can be educated. They are the future of this state. They're the future of this country, and we have to make sure as the adults that we do everything possible for them to get the best education that they can. Thank you for joining us tonight. Appreciate it. Good to see you again, Aaron.
Oh, yeah.
Glad to have my lovely, beautiful wife with us tonight, and we'll be doing this again soon. We have several topics that we're going to be discussing and looking forward to doing that, but we thought it was important to get this information out. Until next time, thank you and God bless.